The night the vampire king chose a maid over queens, the chandeliers trembled, alliances bled, and an immortal empire began to crack. No one feared the crown that evening. Only the quiet woman holding the king's arm and what her presence meant. Hey, everyone. So glad you're here today. It really means a lot. I'd love to know where you're watching from. So go ahead and drop your city, state, or country in the chat. And if you're watching live or catching this later, say hi anyway. Can't wait to connect with all of you. Valentine's night always arrived in New Orleans like a beautiful lie. The French Quarter glowed red with lanterns, wrought iron balconies dripped roses, and the Mississippi breathed slow and dark beneath the moon. To tourists, it was romance. To the Crimson Court hidden behind old money and older magic, it was war dressed as celebration. King Alaric Noctum stood alone in the shadowed antechamber of his estate, fingers resting against the glass of a tall window, watching the city pulse with borrowed life. Centuries had taught him how fragile nights like this truly were. Behind him, the great hall filled with sound. Silk brushed marble. Laughter sharpened into strategy. Noble families from across the country. Ancient vampire lines who had followed him from Europe and quietly rooted themselves into America's wealth, gathered with their daughters dressed in crimson and bone-white lace. They smiled like saints and measured him like prey. Valentine's night was never about affection. It was about selection. The woman on the king's arm determined which family rose, which fell, and which would be erased quietly before spring. Alaric adjusted the cuff of his black coat, its lining stitched with sigils older than Louisiana itself. He looked exactly as the court expected, tall, pale, devastatingly composed. A white man carved from moonlight and authority, his silver hair pulled back neatly, crimson eyes calm and unreadable. They thought they knew him. They always did, and they were always wrong. A soft sound broke the silence behind him. Footsteps, unhurried, familiar. "You're bleeding," a woman said gently. Alaric glanced down. A thin line of red traced his knuckle where he'd tightened his grip on the window frame. He hadn't noticed. He rarely did when thoughts turned inward. "It will heal," he replied. Lysandra Vale stepped closer, already reaching for a cloth. She wore her usual simple black dress, sleeves buttoned to the wrist, hair braided neatly down her back. Her skin was light, untouched by time despite the centuries she had lived within these walls. Her eyes, soft brown, endlessly steady, met his without fear. They always had. "It will," she agreed, dabbing his hand, "but the nobles will smell it, and they're already feral tonight." A corner of his mouth lifted. "Is that your professional assessment, Maid Vale?" She snorted quietly, an unladylike sound that would have earned any other servant punishment. "It's my lived experience, Your Majesty." Valentine's night turns powerful people into fools. From the hall came a sharp laugh, Lady Seraphine's, no doubt, followed by the clink of glasses. Lysandra stiffened almost imperceptibly. Alaric noticed. He always noticed. The court did not see her, but he had spent centuries watching her breathe, age not at all, endure everything. She had been a child when he destroyed her kingdom. He remembered her blood on stone. He remembered sparing her for reasons he had never fully named. "You don't have to come," he said quietly. She looked up at him then, really looked, and something old and dangerous passed between them. "I do," she replied. "Tonight more than any other." The knock came before he could answer. "Your Majesty," intoned Chancellor Morcant from beyond the door, his voice slick with expectation. "The court awaits your entrance. And your selection." Lysandra's hand stilled on his. The room seemed to hold its breath. Alaric turned to face her fully. For a moment, he was not a king. He was a man who remembered sunlight, who remembered laughter that hadn't been sharpened into knives. "They will hate you," he said. "They already do." She smiled, small, brave, devastating. "They hated me long before tonight. At least now it will be honest. If you were standing in that hall, watching nobles who thrived on cruelty and entitlement, you'd understand the kind of evil they represented, the kind that believes power belongs only to bloodlines and not to loyalty or love. And if you believe people like that deserve to be challenged, not obeyed, then you already know whose side you're on. Alaric inhaled once. Decision settled like a blade locking into place. He raised his arm. "Come," he said. The doors opened. Sound crashed over them. Music, gasps, whispered outrage. Hundreds of eyes snapped toward the entrance as King Alaric Noctum stepped into the great hall of the Crimson Court. He wore black and crimson, a living echo of the city's heartbeat. And on his arm walked Lysandra Vale. Not a maid, a woman. She wore royal red, the fabric flowing like spilled wine, cut to honor strength rather than submission. Her hair was loose, dark waves catching the candlelight. At her throat rested the king's signet, glowing faintly with ancient magic. Proof of a bond no law could undo. Silence fell, then murmurs, then barely contained fury. "A servant," someone hissed. "She's human. That's the maid." Alaric stopped at the center of the hall. His gaze swept the room, cold and absolute. "You celebrate love as a transaction," he said, voice carrying without effort. "Tonight, I reject your game." He turned slightly, lowering his voice for Lysandra alone. "My Valentine," he murmured. "My constant. My rebellion." Across the room, Chancellor Morkant's face twisted, ambition curdling into rage. And in that moment, as Lysandra's fingers tightened around Alaric's arm, the war that would decide the future of the Crimson Court truly began. The hall did not erupt immediately. That was the cruelest part. Shock held the Crimson Court in a suspended breath, hundreds of immortal hearts pausing as if the universe itself needed a moment to correct a mistake. Lysandra felt it in the way the air pressed against her skin, heavy with disbelief, sharp with restrained hunger. Alaric's arm beneath her hand was steady, a quiet promise that he would not let go, no matter how violently the night turned. Then the whispers sharpened into sound. "She's nothing," someone muttered behind a jeweled fan. "A reminder of his arrogance," another replied. Chancellor Morkant recovered first. He always did. Tall, gaunt, his pale face carved into a permanent expression of superiority. He stepped forward, hands clasped behind his back like a patient executioner. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, bowing just enough to appear respectful. "Surely this is some symbolic gesture. Valentine's night requires a consort of standing, of blood." Alaric did not raise his voice. He never needed to. "She has stood beside me longer than any of you," he replied. "And her blood has already paid for this court 1,000 times over." Lysandra felt the words land like blows around the room. Eyes finally focused on her not as furniture, not as background, but as a threat. She lifted her chin, meeting their stares one by one. Centuries of invisibility had taught her how to endure contempt without breaking. But tonight she refused to shrink. Lady Seraphine glided forward, her gown whispering against the marble. "With respect, my king," she said, lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "Tradition binds us. A human, former or otherwise, cannot fulfill the role. The court will not accept it. The court. Always the court." Lysandra almost laughed. If you've ever watched powerful people hide cruelty behind rules, you know exactly the kind of evil that wears tradition like armor. And if you believe loyalty should matter more than lineage, you already know who deserves to fall. Alaric turned to Lysandra then, his gaze softening in a way no one else had ever witnessed. "Do you wish to leave?" he asked quietly. "I will end this now if you say the word." She thought of the little girl she had been, kneeling in ash, spared by a monster who later became her home. She thought of nights spent cleaning blood from marble while listening to the king whisper regrets he pretended not to have. She squeezed his arm. "I'm exactly where I choose to be." That was the moment Morkant's smile died. Music resumed at Alaric's command, forced and brittle. The nobles returned to their seats, watching as the king led Lysandra to the high table. Servants froze, unsure whether to bow to her or ignore her. Alaric pulled out her chair himself, a deliberate act that sent another ripple of outrage through the room. As courses were served, Lysandra felt the weight of scrutiny press harder. Every sip of wine, every breath was judged. Morkant spoke softly to the council beside him, eyes never leaving her. She didn't need enhanced senses to know plotting when she saw it. Power did not forgive humiliation. You're doing well, Alaric murmured, leaning closer. I've scrubbed bloodstains older than most of them, she whispered back. This is easy. His lips twitched, but his eyes were dark alert. He felt it too. The shift, the danger coiling beneath silk and etiquette. When the dance was announced, Morkant rose again. Tradition dictates, he said, that the first dance is reserved for those of equal standing. Perhaps Her Majesty's companion would prefer to observe. Lysandra stood before Alaric could answer. I would prefer dance, she said clearly. Gasps fluttered like frightened birds. Alaric rose with her, offering his hand. As they stepped onto the floor, the music deepened, slow and haunting. He pulled her close, one hand firm at her waist. They will move tonight, he said under his breath. Let them, she replied. I've waited centuries for honesty. As they turned beneath the chandeliers, Lysandra caught Morkant's gaze. There was no mask now, only hatred. If you've ever wanted to stand against people who weaponize power and call it order, this was the moment. And if you're not siding with men like Morkant, prove it. Stand for fairness, for love that defies cruelty. Only manipulators defend systems like his. The dance ended to strained applause. Before the night could fracture further, the lights flickered. A pulse of magic rippled through the hall. Morkant's doing. Alaric's jaw tightened. They've made their move, he said calmly. Lysandra laced her fingers through his. Then let them learn, she answered, heart steady, that I am not disposable. Above them, the chandeliers steadied. But the court never would again. The attack did not come with fire or fangs. That would have been honest. Instead, it came wrapped in legality, whispered votes, and poisoned smiles sharpened over centuries. By the time the chandeliers stopped swaying, the Crimson Court had already chosen its weapon, procedure. Lysandra felt it before she heard it, the subtle shift in the room, like predators aligning their hunger. The music had not resumed. Nobles leaned toward one another, murmuring behind gloved hands. Chancellor Morkant stood at the edge of the high table now, flanked by elders whose names were etched into American history through shell corporations and old foundations. Power in this country did not always wear crowns. Sometimes it wore tailored suits and claimed neutrality. My king, Morkant said, raising his voice just enough to command attention, an emergency motion has been called. Alaric did not turn. His hand rested lightly at the small of Lysandra's back, grounding her. You presume much, he replied. I presume necessity, Morkant countered. The court's stability is threatened. Our laws, your laws, were created to protect us from emotional governance. A ripple of agreement moved through the room. Lysandra recognized the tactic immediately. She had seen it in every era, every city they had hidden in across the United States. When those in power feared change, they called it disorder. When they feared love, they called it weakness. State your motion, Alaric said. Morkant smiled. We invoke the right of severance. The human, he glanced pointedly at Lysandra, must be removed from royal proximity until her influence is evaluated. Removed. The word struck like ice. Lysandra's fingers curled, but Alaric's grip tightened subtly, warning her not to react yet. Lady Seraphine rose. This is mercy, she said sweetly. A private holding, just until Valentine's night concludes. Surely, even you see the wisdom. If you've ever watched people pretend cruelty is kindness, you know how this sounds. And if you believe that silence equals consent, this is where you choose a side. No, Alaric said. The room stilled. The right of severance applies only to consorts seeking power, he continued. Lysandra seeks none. She already has it. Morkant's eyes flicked to the elders. Then perhaps we should put that to the test. Before Lysandra could move, ancient sigils flared beneath the marble floor. Cold magic snapped around her wrists like invisible chains. Gasps filled the hall, some delighted, some fearful. Alaric moved instantly, crimson eyes blazing. Release her. This vote has already passed, Morkant said calmly. By remaining silent, the court agreed. Lysandra laughed softly. It surprised even her. Funny, she said, lifting her bound hand slightly. That's exactly how my kingdom fell. men voting while pretending not to. Alaric turned to her, something fierce and proud burning through centuries of restraint. "You don't have to endure this," he said. "I've endured worse," she replied. Then, louder, to the room, "And I will not be removed quietly to make monsters comfortable." The sigils flickered. That was when the magic she had never named answered. The castle itself groaned. Candles guttered. The signet at her throat burned warm, not with Alaric's power, but with her own. Ancient, patient, woven into stone and blood and memory. The binding spell faltered, cracking like glass under pressure. Morkan stepped back. "Impossible." Lysandra straightened as the chains dissolved. "You bound me to this place centuries ago," she said evenly. "You forgot to ask what that would make me." Alaric felt it then, her presence expanding, not as a threat to him, but as an equal. The court recoiled. Some elders bowed without realizing it. "If you're watching this unfold," Lysandra continued, eyes locking on a Morkant, "ask yourself who you're really protecting when you defend systems built on fear. And if you're not siding with men like him, men who cage what they can't control, then say it. Stand against it. Only cowards pretend neutrality." Silence followed. Heavy. Transformative. Morkan's composure finally cracked. "This isn't over." "No," Alaric agreed, stepping beside Lysandra, their shoulders aligned. "It's just begun." He raised his voice. "The right is null. Any who challenge it challenge me." Some nobles fled. Others stayed, calculating. Lysandra leaned into him, heart racing. Not with fear, but with something dangerously close to hope. Above them, the chandeliers burned brighter. And for the first time since Valentine's night began, the court understood one truth. The maid they tried to erase was now the one rewriting their future. The storm broke just before dawn. Rain lashed the iron balconies of the estate, washing rose petals and spilled wine into the gutters below. Inside the great hall, what remained of the Crimson Court stood divided. Some nobles clustered near the exits, others frozen in place, uncertain which future they dared to choose. The chandeliers still burned bright, but their light no longer softened anything. It exposed. Lysandra stood beside King Alaric at the center of the room, her heartbeat steady despite the chaos she had unleashed. She could feel the castle responding to her now, walls humming faintly, ancient wards breathing with her pulse. This place had been her prison. Tonight, it had chosen her. Chancellor Morkant wiped rainwater or sweat from his brow as thunder rolled overhead. "You would let her undo centuries of order," he snarled, desperation cracking his polished tone. "Everything we built in this country, our influence, our secrecy, our dominance, rests on control." Alaric stepped forward, his presence silencing even the storm. "No," he said coldly, "it rests on fear. And fear has always been your weakness." Morkant laughed, sharp and bitter. "Love makes you blind, my king." Lysandra answered before Alaric could. "No," she said calmly. "Love makes you brave. Power without it makes monsters. If you've ever watched people cling to power by tearing others down, if you've ever hated how systems reward cruelty and call it strength, this was the moment that mattered. And if you don't stand with men like Morkant, say it. Stand against them. Only tyrants fear voices like hers." Morkant moved suddenly, drawing a blade etched with binding runes. "Then let history remember you as the king who fell for a maid." He never reached them. The castle surged. Stone cracked. Ancient magic, older than the court, older than America itself, rose like a tide. The blade shattered midair. Morkant was hurled backward, slamming into the far wall, collapsing beneath the weight of every oath he had broken. Silence followed. Final. Absolute. One by one, the elders knelt. Not to Alaric, to Lysandra. She felt tears sting her eyes, unexpected and unstoppable. Alaric turned to her, softening his fierce gaze. "You were never bound to serve," he said quietly. "You were bound to lead." She looked at the court, the frightened, the hopeful, the uncertain. "Then we change it," she said. "Together." Alaric took her hand and lifted it before them all. "By my crown and my blood," he declared. Lysandra Vale, is my equal, my queen, my Valentine, not for a night, but for eternity. The storm eased as if the world itself exhaled. Later, when the hall stood empty and dawn painted the city gold, Lysandra rested her head against Alaric's shoulder on the balcony overlooking New Orleans. The future loomed vast and dangerous, but no longer lonely. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He kissed her temple. "I regret only that I waited so long." Below them, the city stirred, unaware that an ancient reign had ended and something kinder had begun. And somewhere in the shadows, survivors plotted. Love had won the night. But the war? The war had only just begun. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. It really means a lot that you spent some time here with me today. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, drop a comment, or share it with someone who might enjoy it too. And don't forget to follow/subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I love hearing from you. So let me know your thoughts, questions, or just say hi in the comments. Thanks again. You're the reason I do this, and I can't wait to see you in the next one.